Front and center at the 14th National People's Congress, China's economy tops the agenda. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. On Wednesday, China's top economic officials, including its commerce and finance ministers, held a news conference on the state of the nation's economy. They answered a variety of questions regarding economic progress, objectives, and challenges for 2024. CGTN's Hong Fei has this report from Beijing.
The country's top economic decision makers covered a wide range of issues, including reform and development, fiscal budget, business and capital market regulation. Officials expressed confidence in the economy, highlighting many positive numbers in 2023. They say that major economic targets were met last year and restructuring efforts were showing results. Investments in high-tech and service industries were up. Consumption and tourism was also another indicator of resilience in the economy. In the future, China will continue to improve business environment, create more opportunities for multinational corporations, cutting tax and fees, and helping them with financing. China will also advocate for multilateral trade, and I had the opportunity to ask the Ministry of Commerce about that.
I'm with CGTN. My question goes to the Minister of Commerce, Mr. Wang. You recently led a delegation to the 13th Ministerial Conference at the World Trade Organization. Can you brief us on the outcomes and impact of that meeting? What are China's plans in promoting WTO reforms and safeguarding the multilateral trading system?
MC13 has successfully implemented the results of its domestic regulation of trade and services negotiations, the first such multilateral agreement since the WTO's inception. This will save global enterprises $127 billion US. As a key WTO member and the largest developing country, China is committed to comprehensive WTO reforms. We oppose politicizing and weaponizing economic and trade issues, and a pan-security attitude. China is dedicated to promoting an open world economy and fostering a community with a shared future for mankind.
In terms of foreign trade, officials acknowledged a challenging landscape, including slowing global demand, rising protectionism, and the fact that more than 3,000 trade restrictions were implemented worldwide last year. There are a lot of uncertainties, but there are also opportunities. China's foreign trade is on an upward trend, noting a significant increase in exports of new energy products. China will continue to put forth more stimulus to keep foreign trade stable, which includes improving financial services for SMEs and making visa applications easier. And in terms of government spending, China will issue ultra-long special treasury bonds, a major step to support national strategic projects. The government will also channel more targeted spending to areas with huge potential, such as rural development. The key message from the economic planners today was to counter unpredictable factors in the world with our own certainty and predictability at home. Hong Fei, CGTN, Beijing.
To continue our conversation, let's bring in our panel, all of them joining us from Beijing. We have Einar Tangen. He is a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives. Gong is a professor at the University of International Business and Economics and a China Forum expert. Zoon Ahmed is a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Qiang is the assistant director of the International Monetary Institute. Why don't we start with you? The numbers. The government work report came out on Tuesday. We saw that news conference referenced in the story. China's GDP expanded by 5.2% in 2023. It's targeted to grow around 5% in 2024. What do you make of the numbers?
Well, I think this number 5% is actually being based on many factors. You have to understand, so China right now is just one step away from getting into the high income level, which is like $13,000 US or $14,000 US, depending on you use the exchange ratio or you use the PPP. Well, usually when an economy getting close to that kind of size, their GDP growth speed will slow down a little bit. For example, when you at the 6,000 or 8,000 middle income country level, usually your GDP growth will be like 6% or 8%. But when you're getting closer to like 20,000 or 40,000, usually your GDP grows like America like European Union would usually be like 3% or even 2%. So China just in the middle of that, so 5% is a fair number. And it also, I think the premier made it very clear, one very important target for China this year is to create more than 12 million jobs into the market. So usually 12 million jobs can be translated into, according to Chinese current size of GDP and economic structure, can be around 5% of the GDP growth. So that's the reason why we have set up this number. But also, like last year, like we discussed before, 5% of the GDP growth is not a binding target, which means it'll give you a rough idea and impression of how the whole country should do in this new year. But usually, if you do 4.5, or if you do 5.5, or even 6%, it's just okay. So it's like last year, even though last year also they said the target would be 5% a year, but eventually it turns out to be 5.2%. So my prediction is that this year, the Chinese economy, the balance sheet for the household and the enterprises can be much better than last year. And also, we have already seen the consumption tourism has already been very hot in the Q1. So we have all the reason to believe this year, probably my guess is that it will end up like 5.2% or even 5.5% a year.
And Einar, just to kind of piggyback off what he was talking about, employment, these numbers, 12.5 million jobs in 2023 added. You're looking at an unemployment rate around 5.2%, which looks really good. They're projecting 12 million jobs for 2024, but an uptick in unemployment, not a lot, up to 5.5%. There are some who are expressing some concerns about employment, especially for young graduates entering the workforce. Is that an area of concern, and what can you do about it?
Yeah, well, there'll be about 11 million graduates from different colleges across China. Obviously, it is a concern how you put them to use. Internally, everything that the government is doing is about confidence. You have to, if you look at it that way, China has a very strong, amount of savings. There's a tremendous amount that is there. The question is putting it back to use, and that requires people to feel confident. Right now, a lot of Chinese businesses are going outside of China due to excess capacity. It's really, really brutally competitive within China, even when you have smaller expectations in terms of profits. They're not going out. Hopefully, they'll take with them a lot of these new graduates who could be very, very useful. So China has a multi-pronged approach. The employment obviously is an issue because there are back years too, where there was where there were whole classes during COVID where there was very, very poor employment. You have to get those people back into the system. Hopefully, they will set up small, medium-sized business entities and be a contributor in that respect. But a lot of this is about having people have the confidence to go out there and work hard, the way they did at the very beginning and have continued to do throughout.
John, on the confidence level, the government does have tools at its disposal to kind of actually work at the levers to try and pump up the economy. That was something that was discussed as well. I want to play some sound for you, and I want to get your reaction on the other side. Let's listen.
This year, we will exercise more effective macro regulation and strengthen coordination between fiscal, monetary, employment, industrial and regional policies, so that all policies are well aligned and form synergy. We will continue to support the real economy, promote consumption, expand investment, and stabilize foreign trade.
Obviously, they can, increase spending. There can be tax breaks. They've also talked about issuing treasury bonds. What type of policies do you think we're going to see over the next 12 months in terms of helping the economy move in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I think what this minister is saying is in China it's called policy coherence or regulatory coherence. What it means is that over the years there's a lot of complaints about different ministries coming out with sort of different policies, sometimes contradictory policies, not so much incoherence towards economic development. And I think there's been a lot of complaints about this issue from the media and also from the public. And I think starting from last year actually, the central government has come up with this term called policy coherence, which means that different ministries have to be working together towards a common goal. And that common goal is laser focused on economic development at this point. So I think this is what really he's talking about. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's indeed a fact that there's a lot of room to be improved here from the policy perspective. And I think it's a good thing that the government's primary objective right now is, in my view, is preoccupied with going towards a strong economy. And I think that 5%. I just want to make a correction. The stated goal here is actually about 5%. What it means is that it can be a little bit more, it can be a little bit less than 5%. So I think with the size of China's economy and with the economic development status right now, which is very much close to a developed country, I would say 5% achievement is already a fairly tall order at this point.
And John, let me ask you about some of the areas that were touched on in our report: consumption, tourism, foreign trade. That's been an area where it's been lagging. Where do you see possible areas that could be ginned up? Where are areas of concern?
Well, I think right now the service sectors have already come back pretty strong. In last month was the Spring Festival season, and the statistics are showing a very strong comeback, I would say. So I'm not so much worried about the service sectors, but what worries me is the manufacturing sectors, and this concerns jobs. China has the same problem as the United States. Manufacturing in a way is indeed starting to migrate away from this country. So these good manufacturing jobs, in a sense, are indeed disappearing. And there's, on top of this, I would suspect there's also a structural change in the labor market, in the sense that we're indeed seeing machines replacing people. This was a phenomenon observed during the Industrial Revolution. In a sense, we are already entering into a new industrial revolution centered around robotics and AI and stuff like that. And it's a fact that machines are indeed replacing people. So I think, how do we adjust to that challenge? How do we create more jobs to replace these manufacturing jobs remains to be a challenge. So I think it's in this regard that I'm a little bit concerned. And the creation of new jobs is indeed a challenge.
Zoon, to that point, talking about manufacturing, one of the things that came out in the report is restrictions on foreign investment in China's manufacturing will be abolished, along with the reduction of market access restrictions on telecommunication and the healthcare sector. How significant are those moves?
Thank you, firstly, Mike, for having me on the program. I think the perception, especially during COVID years, that somehow China was, not as welcoming of foreign investments, or that, like Professor John just mentioned, the policies were somehow not coherent. I think to reduce that perception and to welcome foreign investors is something that is indeed a priority for China. I'll also quickly mention, taking one of the points that Professor John mentioned about how manufacturing jobs are sort of leaving the country. And this is a point that has caught a lot of attention, especially among developing countries, global south countries that are closely watching the two sessions and what direction China is moving forward with in terms of the economy, is this term about high quality production capacities, new quality production, this idea. How can China accommodate the fact that, yes, indeed, there is a higher skilled labor, the population is not increasing at this point? What can be done in terms of incorporating technological advancement, artificial intelligence, and other efficiencies to make sure that that the country is able to sustain the targeted growth, which is, as again mentioned, approximately 5%. At the same time, another very important factor, while welcoming, foreign investors, and also we see a lot of visa restrictions being reduced. Many countries, there has been a visa restriction abolished. This is in a way an attempt that is going to welcome more visitors, but also more potential investors, and open up the global economy to considering investment in China. another very important factor, I think, in the report and so far, which is about localization, urbanization, and localized solutions. So whereas, on the country level, you have an overall encouragement of increasing trade collaborations, increasing the attractiveness of the Chinese economy for the global investors, there's also a focus on realizing that localized, regions, villages, cities, etc., will be the ones that will seek the specific solutions based on their unique circumstances to fit into the overall direction of the economy. So I think, we see a lot of significant developments. I think overall, if you see the coverage of the two sessions, obviously there are certain media, certain analysts who are looking at this with a very skeptical perspective. But when you look at a vast majority of the world, the way it's seeking China's economic direction as firstly, a way as an opportunity, but also as an example how to adapt in a world that is increasingly uncertain, in a world where economic restrictions are being imposed by countries that were initially the ones who were spearheading globalization and open trade. How do we respond to those changing realities? And I think in that sense, overall, so far, the communication from Beijing is promising.
Chu, getting back to your comments about this evolution into a high-income level country, one of the things we see is just these advancements. We're talking about AI, we're talking about robotics, and a lot of people are concerned about encroachment on jobs. John's mentioned this as well. How do you balance these?
Well, I think this is very important, first of all, if China wants to really shift the gears and optimize its economic structure and getting into a higher level of not only its technology, but also for people's livelihood. The technology is a key. We call it a commanding height because if we take a look at the route of development for all the developed nations, which is 49 countries in the whole world, you will find every country will follow probably the same route, which is at the end of your development, when you get into a really matured economy, your economy cannot be like before, depend on the massive labor-intensive and the resources guzzling kind of an industry. You probably will rely on one or two very top technologies to support the whole economic system. So, for example, America probably would not be the best country to produce the best T-shirts or sneakers, but they have certain countries like the Facebook, like the Google, like the OpenAI, and just one or two companies will support them to be the strongest economy of the whole world, and also provide enough taxations and a profit for the whole livelihood in the nation. So this is kind of the way you need to really go. So China will have this kind of the road as well. For example, EV, like the solar panels, the lithium batteries, and all kinds of the digital devices would be the next future. But yes, the question is, can this kind of the technology like AI, like the robot factory, to replace people? Well, I don't quite think so. It's because, sometimes when the new technology appears, new job also appears. It's like this when the steam machine just appears. A lot of people have the smaller kind of the questions, suspicions, and the workers just run into the factory and start to smash down those steam factory machines. But eventually, you will see the technology is the ultimate force to free people, to elevate you from the grinding, poor income and the boring kind of a job into some other creative, high-income job in the service sectors. So you see, since last year, China have actually a very good, change, which is the service sector is booming. Lots of the new jobs are being created. Probably you have heard, the real short videos. Many people are getting into that kind of the business to film that kind of short video, TV operas or the films and etc. So I think right now with the AI technology, for young people, it's easier to getting into a new technology, a new businesses to create something of their own. So lots of new jobs has already been created, and this is just a budding phenomenon. And I think more of the new things is coming after that. And Chinese economy will enter a new level with a new structure. And
Einar, China, of course, the world's second largest economy. Obviously, it has a ripple effect, these tentacles that search all across the world. The predictions coming out of Beijing on how it's going to impact the world economy, also very positive. Let's listen, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
I'm sure Chinese economy will be able to overcome.
All right, we don't have that sound, but I will say that they do expect expansion to have a global economic impact around 30%. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, one of the things that was touched on in the report about WTO reforms, that's something that China is really advocating for.
Yeah, I mean, China is two things. Domestically, China learned a lot from the special economic development zones, technology zones that they had. They understood that you need policy coherence. We've talked about that. They also want to take advantage of the efficiencies that they've created, especially along the logistics and the supply chain. In terms of getting the economy ready for the next step, a lot of that is going to education. You'll note that that was a part of it. Externally, what China is doing is trying to grow markets for the future. And if those markets aren't in the United States and Europe, if they're in the global south, if they're part of the BRICS, or they're part of these new economic alliances that are coming up, that is what China is going to do. But I would caution people to think that it's necessary for economies to have a couple of champions. Actually, the vast amount of economic activity occurs with small and medium-sized business entities. There are a number of mentions about that, and that's really what connects these two. If you start looking at the global south, where China is welcome and the markets are there, it's connecting small business entities across borders that is going to be particularly useful, leading to efficiencies that will propel both sides of those economies. These are the types of things that China is pushing because they really do believe in this kind of shared future. Very different narrative than what you're hearing from Europe and the United States.
Yeah, John, let me get your thoughts on the WTO reforms question as well. What does China really want to see there?
Well, China, together with the European Union countries, are strong supporters of WTO. I think there is some political force from Washington that just want to see WTO die. And certainly, I think the next very strong presidential candidate in the United States is a strong believer in that. I think regarding WTO reform, there have been some new developments in my view. One of the criticism about WTO is that one vote can kill any proposal. It moves very slowly, things like that nature. I think at the MC13 meeting that you just talked about, I think it's in Abu Dhabi, if I remember this correctly, or Dubai. They passed a new measure related to investment facilitation. And this new measure is actually passed in what's called a plurilateral fashion. What it means is that WTO members can adopt it, proposal, or they can just refuse to adopt this proposal, and this is what's called a plurilateral form. And I think the fact of a plurilateral form that is passed in the history of WTO represents a very major step towards reform, in my view. So I think WTO reform is undertaken right now, and I think China and the European Union countries are keen on maintaining WTO status and certainly reforming its current mechanism.
Zoon, the China Daily reported that the Central Economic Work Conference that was in December of 2023 called for government policy to seek progress while maintaining stability and establish the new before abolishing the old. It sounds like a rather prudent approach. What do you read into that?
I think this also somewhat connects with the concept, that was initially introduced about new quality productive forces, and I think it's also bearing in mind the fact that there were phases in China's obviously a historically unprecedented development over the last 45 years since the reform and opening up, where the transitions were not as smooth as they could have been. Lessons have been learned from that. We see vast examples of success under the special economic zones and adapting to changing, evolving realities and technology. But at times, those changes were so fast that there were consequences that could have been avoided. Now, one of the things that recently also has been reported by Chinese media is a speech that President Xi made, where he was specifically addressing the Jiangsu government and talking about, when we are talking about incorporating new technologies, when we are talking about improving efficiencies, and like, one of our panelists also mentioned, I mean, it doesn't mean we want to replace jobs. It has to be about improving the ability of the existing mechanisms to further, adapt to better incorporate the growing capabilities that China is developing in terms of AI and otherwise. However, at the same time, he also cautioned the local governments, do not take this as an encouragement to just radically change how the process of development is going as we stand today. And I think that is something that all local governments need to be told, that by incorporating improved technologies, by thinking about greener mechanisms and ways of building or urbanizing or improving the incomes of your regions, do not eradicate, do not cease to do what you're doing in a way that is more harmful. So I think one aspect is that there has been a recognition, a realization that the transformation has to be one that is sustainable and as beneficial to people as possible. The transition has to be smooth, and simultaneously, this is also setting an example for other developing countries. Like we talk about, the collaborations under the BRI, we talk about how China is enabling multiple developing countries to address SDGs in more creative ways, in more localized ways. It is also an encouragement for these countries and for China's own regions to think about these developments in a more localized and sustainable way. So I think so far China has set a strong precedent. If we observe the domestic development, how regions, how small villages have become, have developed further to become more urbanized, to improve their incomes, it has been through local realizing and assessing, analyzing, and studying the local, domestic, the specific realities of that region, and to incorporate efficiencies, to incorporate greener ways, to incorporate the various advancements that China is making, will require them to be sustainable in that process.
Einar, briefly, because we're just about out of time, I do want to talk to you about a few years ago, I was at the two sessions. You're waiting along with all these other foreign reporters to go in, and everybody's just waiting for that economic data to come out, and then they race to get it out on the air. But then it seems over the year, they're like, oh, this economy, it can't keep chugging along like this. It's going to collapse. And we heard them address that yesterday and say that, this has been refuted time and time again. What do you make of that Western media philosophy that China's economy can't keep humming along like this?
Well, the U.S. is reputed to spend about $90 billion a year on messaging. A lot of it is disinformation. There's still this fundamental misunderstanding of how China is developing. If people are trying to have one takeaway from this session, they should understand that China's interested in innovative development. So unfortunately, let's hope that works.
We've run out of time, but I want to thank all of you. It's been a great discussion. We're going to need to leave it there. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.